The alarm hit before I even reached the control deck, a low pulse of red light bouncing off every wall of Threshold Station, and my first thought was that we were about to die. A ship had entered the docking lane without clearance. No warning, no signal, just a shape sliding out of the dark, sleek and silver, moving with a kind of calm that felt worse than aggression. I ran the last stretch of corridor with my heart slamming against my ribs, and when I burst onto the deck, I found Commander Owen Blake standing frozen in front of the main display, his hand hovering over the defense console like he could not decide whether pressing it would save us or end us. "Identify that ship," he said, his voice tight. The station system answered in a flat, mechanical tone. "Kaelinth vessel, class unknown, no hostile signature detected." The room went silent in a way that felt louder than the alarm had been. Every person on that deck had grown up hearing the same stories I had. 3 worlds, 3 different species, burned clean in a matter of hours, no warning given, no reason offered afterward. The Kaelinth did not explain themselves. They arrived, they finished whatever they came to do, and they left. Entire governments had built their foreign policy around a single rule: stay quiet, stay small, and never, under any circumstances, draw their attention. And now their ship was sitting outside our door. "They are hailing us," said Laura Finch, the communications officer, her fingers frozen over her console like she was afraid touching it would make things worse. Blake looked at her, then at me, like he had forgotten I was even standing there. I was not military. I was a linguist, assigned to the station to help smooth over trade disputes between species who could not always understand each other's grammar, let alone each other's intentions. I had no business being part of whatever was about to happen, but something about the way that ship moved told me this was not a trade dispute. "Play it," Blake said. The voice that came through was calm, almost gentle, translated into flat standard by our own systems rather than anything from the Kaelinth side. "We request a single unarmed representative to meet with our envoy. No weapons, no escort. If this request is refused, we will withdraw and trouble you no further." The room erupted into overlapping voices. Half the officers wanted to open fire before the ship could do whatever it was here to do. The other half wanted to evacuate the station immediately and let the Kaelinth have whatever they came for. Nobody suggested actually meeting them, because nobody believed they would walk away from that meeting alive. I heard myself speak before I had fully decided to. "I will go." Blake turned to stare at me like I had lost my mind. Maybe I had, but I kept talking anyway because stopping felt more dangerous than continuing. If they wanted to destroy this station, they would not be asking permission. They would already have done it. This is not how those other incidents began. Someone should go, and it makes more sense for that someone to be the person on this station whose entire job is talking, not fighting. Nobody argued with me, not because they agreed, but because nobody else wanted the job. 10 minutes later, I stood alone in the narrow connector tube that led to their airlock, my hands empty, my chest tight, listening to my own footsteps echo off metal that had never touched a human ship before. The door in front of me slid open without a sound, revealing a room lit in soft gray light, bare except for a single low table and a figure seated on the far side of it. She was smaller than I expected. All those stories had built the Kaelinth into towering shapes of dread in my mind, but the being in front of me stood barely to my shoulder, her skin the color of brushed metal, her eyes closing slowly instead of blinking, giving her expression a look of quiet sorrow rather than menace. "You are not what I expected," I said before I could stop myself. "Neither are you," she answered, her voice carried through a small translation device resting near her collar. "Please sit. My name in your language would sound closest to Sso'ill." I sat because standing suddenly felt like an insult, and because my legs were shaking too much to hold me up with any dignity anyway. "You are afraid," she said. It was not a question. Everyone on this station is afraid, I said. I would be lying if I said I was different. And yet you came. Someone had to. It seemed better if it was someone who might actually listen instead of reaching for a weapon. Something shifted behind her closing eyes, an expression I could not name yet but would come to recognize later as something close to relief. No one has said that to me in 81 years, she said quietly. I asked her the question that every diplomat before me had been too frightened to ask directly. I asked her about the colonies, about the silence before, the destruction, and the silence after. I asked her why her people had done what they had done, 3 separate times, across 3 centuries, without ever offering an explanation the rest of the galaxy could understand. She did not flinch from the question. If anything, she seemed to have been waiting for someone to finally ask it properly. We do not reproduce as you do, she said. We do not raise children the way your species understands it. Each of us begins as something called an instar, a single mind that grows and deepens over centuries. And near the end of an instar's life, something happens that we have never found the right words to explain to outsiders. The mind does not simply fade. It becomes loud, unbearably loud, in ways your instruments cannot measure and your language has no word for. Anyone nearby of any species is caught in that final surge, and it does not kill quickly or cleanly. It unravels the mind first, turning gentle people into strangers to themselves, long before the body follows. I sat in silence, trying to absorb what she was telling me. The 3 worlds your histories remember, she continued, were not attacks. They were what happens when we discover, too late, that a dying instar is close enough to reach a populated world, and there is no time left to warn anyone, no way to move that many people before the surge arrives. What you call destruction, we experienced as failure. Every single time, we failed to save them in time, and ending their suffering quickly was the only mercy left to offer. Why did no one explain this before? I asked. 300 years is a long time to stay silent. We tried the first time, she said, and for the first time her voice carried something sharper than sorrow. We were not believed. Grief does not listen well to explanations, and fear listens even less. After that, it became simpler to let the galaxy fear us as monsters than to be called liars on top of murderers. Fear, at least, keeps populations away from our territory. It has kept the last surge, the one 30 years ago, from claiming anyone at all, because everyone had already learned to stay clear of our borders. I did not know what to say to that. Every instinct in me wanted to believe her, and every year of training I had received told me that believing dangerous strangers too quickly was how good people ended up dead. But there was something in the careful, exhausted way she spoke, something that did not match the cold, silent monster from the reports. "Why tell me?" I finally asked. "Why now after 81 years of silence?" "Because in 6 years of records from this station, you are the only person who looked directly at me instead of at the file describing me," she said. "Your species is young enough that it has not yet decided who we are. I came here hopping to find one person willing to ask a real question. I did not expect to find one so quickly." I left that meeting with my mind spinning, and no easy way to explain any of it to Blake without sounding like I had been charmed or manipulated. I gave him the truth anyway, every uncomfortable piece of it, and watched him struggle with the same impossible choice I had just faced, whether to trust an explanation that upended 3 centuries of galactic fear, or to dismiss it and stay safely inside the old story. He chose caution, which I understood, even as it frustrated me. The Kaelinth ship was allowed to remain at a distance, under constant watch, while my report was sent up through channels far above either of our ranks. For 2 days, nothing happened. The ship simply waited, patient in a way that no hostile force behaves. On the 3rd day, everything changed at once. The station's sensors picked up a distortion far out past our outer markers, a ripple in space that no instrument could properly classify, growing stronger by the hour. Laura Finch was the one who noticed it first. her voice cutting through the control deck with an edge of real fear. "Whatever that is, it is getting closer and it is getting worse." I did not need long to guess what it was. I requested contact with Sso'ill immediately, and this time it was Blake himself who authorized it without hesitation, because whatever pride or doubt had held him back before was gone the moment actual danger appeared on his screens. Her voice, when it came through, held none of the calm from our first meeting. "It is an instar," she said, "nearing its final phase, farther from our monitored zones than we expected. If it reaches full collapse this close to your station, everyone aboard will be caught in the surge." "How long," Blake demanded, "before it reaches us?" 6 hours, perhaps less." The deck exploded into motion, officers shouting evacuation orders, engineers scrambling to calculate whether the station's transport capacity could move every soul aboard in time. 6 hours sounded like plenty, until you tried to fit thousands of people, station staff, traders, diplomats from a dozen species, into a handful of shuttles built for a fraction of that number. "We cannot move everyone in time," Laura said, her voice shaking now. "Not without help." I looked at the comm display, at the quiet shape of the Kaelinth ship still holding position outside our hull, and I understood, with a kind of dread that settled cold in my stomach, what had to happen next. "Ask them," I said to Blake, "ask them for help." He stared at me like I had suggested something insane, and maybe I had. Every instinct in this station, every year of training every officer here had received, said that asking the Kaelinth for anything was suicide. But I had sat across from Sso'ill. I had seen her exhaustion, her grief, the way she spoke about failing to save people in time. I did not believe, not anymore, that she would let this station burn if she had the power to prevent it. Blake made the call. Sso'ill's answer came almost before he finished asking. "Our ship carries transport capacity beyond your shuttles. We can take on your people directly and move them clear of the surge radius before it arrives. But you must trust us enough to let your people board a Kaelinth vessel, and I understand if that trust does not exist yet." The next 20 minutes were the longest of my life. Blake had to convince officers who had spent their careers being trained to fear this exact scenario, ordinary people terrified of stepping onto a ship belonging to the same species their nightmares had been built around. I stood at the connector tube once more, this time not alone, but at the front of a line of frightened station staff, repeating the same words over and over. "They are trying to save us, please. Just trust me a little longer." Some people refused outright, choosing instead to crowd into the overloaded shuttles rather than board the Kaelinth ship, and I did not blame them. Fear built over 3 centuries does not dissolve in 20 minutes, no matter how urgent the moment. But enough people trusted me, or trusted the desperation in Blake's voice, to fill nearly half the ship's capacity, moving in careful, silent lines through a corridor that belonged to the very race they had spent their lives dreading. I stayed until the last group boarded, then followed them myself, my legs unsteady, my chest tight with a fear that had nothing to do with the Kaelinth anymore and everything to do with whether we would clear the radius in time. The ship moved the moment the doors sealed, faster and smoother than anything I had experienced on a human vessel, pressing us gently back into whatever passed for seating in a Kaelinth transport hold. Sso'ill found me there, standing quietly at the edge of the crowd, her closing eyes finding mine across the room. "We will clear the radius with time to spare," she said. "Your people made a difficult choice today." "So did yours," I said. "You did not have to come back for us." "We always come back," she said, and there was something in her voice that sounded, for the first time since I had met her, almost like grief giving way to hope. "We have simply never had anyone willing to let us." We watched together through the viewport as the station shrank behind us, and somewhere beyond it, invisible to any sensor I understood, the surge finally broke, silent and vast, exactly where the station had been sitting only minutes before. Nobody aboard felt a thing. Nobody's mind unraveled. The mercy Sso'ill had once described as her people's only gift arrived this time not as destruction, but as an empty stretch of space where tragedy would have happened, had we been even an hour slower to trust her. The station itself came through undamaged, its systems designed to withstand far more than an empty patch of dark space passing near its hull. Every person aboard the Kaelinth ship returned to it within a day, shaken but alive, carrying a story that none of them would have believed themselves capable of living through only a week earlier. What followed was not simple, and I will not pretend it was. Reports went up through channels far above Blake or myself, met with disbelief in some offices and quiet, cautious hope in others. It took years, not days, before other stations along that border began allowing monitored contact instead of silence, before scientists from several species stood beside Kaelinth observers and watched, with proper instruments this time, an instar reach its final phase in a controlled, empty stretch of space, proving with data what Sso'ill had once offered only with words. I did not do anything I would call heroic. I did not fight off an invasion or solve a mystery through clever tricks. I simply asked a question everyone else had been too afraid to ask, and when the answer came, I chose to believe it rather than dismiss it out of old fear. That turned out to matter more than any weapon ever could have. Sso'ill and I still speak, more often than either of us expected to when we first sat across that bare table. She told me once that humans seem to grow braver the more they learned about something frightening, rather than more cautious, and she said her people had never quite understood a trait like that. I told her it was not bravery at all. It was only curiosity that had learned to outlast fear. She said her language did not have a word for that either. We are still working on finding one.